And I suggest that we follow the following kind of sequence. I'll give you a very quick overview of XCulture, what it is, and how it works. And I hope I will be able to stay within 7 minutes or so, maybe 10 minutes at most, just covering the basics. And then we can just talk, if you have any questions, any special issues that you might be concerned about, and I'll try to answer, and then just see how it goes. Will that be okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Well, so the main idea is very simple. I'm not sure how much you know about the project, but it's been around for a little over than 6 years. And the initial idea was very simple. I teach international business, and at that time I was just trying to find a way to add sort of an experiential component to my international business course. And so I thought it would be a nice idea to find a professor in a different country who also teaches international business, and maybe we could take our students and put them in global virtual teams, and they would work across the time zones and across the cultural differences and across the institutional differences. And so in the process, they would experience firsthand the challenges, and then hopefully also learn the best practices of working with people from other countries. And so the hope was that they would kind of experience in the real life what I'm trying to teach them in the classroom. And so at that time, I didn't know how to find that professor. So what I did was I just simply sent out an email through the Academy of International Business asking if anyone wants to work with me. And it worked very well. So I had quite a few responses within a few hours. And so the project grew very, very fast ever since it was launched in 2010, late 2010. And so, for example, last semester, we had about 5,000 students. About half of them are MBA, about half of them are undergraduate students. And they came from 130-something universities, can't remember the exact number, about 40 different countries. And so what we do is we take those students and we put them in global virtual teams, each team with about 6-7 students, each student in a different country. So this way, everyone on the team is in a different location, on a different continent, in fact. And so they do have to work with all those time zone differences, cultural differences, learn how to communicate using online communication tools, coordination, and stuff like that. And in the initial stages of the project, we would give them a test or a task that would be a sort of a hypothetical case study. In fact, I believe the very first time we did it, it was, you have $1 million. How would you, what kind of business can you start with it? Something like very, very simple. But then about a year or two after we had started doing this, real companies started coming to us with real life challenges. The very first one was Mercedes-Benz. And so they sought help with selling cars, trucks, and buses in developing countries. So the question was, how do we design them to make them more appealing to the customers in the developing countries? And then two, what would be the best marketing strategy? And then ever since, the challenge would be to essentially help a real international business company with their real life international business problem. So we would now select 5 to 10 companies in a given semester. We try to limit it to about 5, but usually get many more applications from companies. And since all of them are so interesting, so sometimes I increase that number a little bit. But we try to have about 5 companies. And just to give you examples from the past years of the more known companies, like, for example, Louis Vuitton. So that's the fashion companies. So their challenge was, where should we open the next store or stores, and how should we design them to make them appealing to the local customers there? Or, for example, the Home Depot, it's a large home improvement kind of retailer, sort of like an American IKEA. So they were asking how to expand beyond North America. So they do very well in Canada, in the United States, in Mexico. So how do we grow beyond this market? So all kinds of challenges like this. We try to select companies that are medium in size. And the reason for that is even though the big companies are perhaps more prestigious to work with, and they also offer more support in the sense of like sponsorship and stuff like that. But one of the things that I don't like about very large companies is that, one, they already operate in most of the countries and have huge research and development budgets, and so they do fairly well on that front, and so there is really not that much our students can tell them they don't know. In many cases, students still provide huge value and they're still happy and come back, but still, those are big, hugely, hierarchical companies, and it's a little harder for the students to deliver, huge value to them, something they couldn't do on their own. Whereas when we look at the medium-sized companies, those are very, very, prime kind of target for us, because on the one hand, they already have a product, they already do very well in their domestic market or maybe in a couple of countries. They are ready to grow, so they have the capacity to produce more, to sell more, and at the same time, they don't have the resources to scout the globe and find the most promising markets and then figure out how to enter those markets, the pricing strategy, the regulations, the logistics. So for them, it's too difficult to do. And so when our students, thousands of them, go and do that research, for them, it's a huge value. It's something they wouldn't be able to do it with their own, 50, 100 people, whatever number of employees they have. So that's where we that's where we get the biggest kind of thank yous, and they're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. This is so great. So we also experiment a little bit with the small companies like startups. We try to have only one or two of them a semester. The reason I like them is usually they would be young companies headed by young people. In fact, we had a couple of startups started by the XCulture alumni. So people who participated in XCulture students went on to launch a company, and then a few years later participated as clients. And so those are a little tricky, because on the one hand, they don't have any resources to offer some sort of sponsorship to us so we can cover our expenses. But at the same time, I like them because the challenges they experience are the challenges that our own students will be basically dealing with in a few years. So many of them would like to launch companies, and so that's the most kind of relevant stuff for them. So, but that's basically, very in simple terms what we do. And as I said, the tasks tend to be fairly, let's call it multidimensional. So the vast majority of the companies seeks help with expanding into new markets. And so the specific questions they would like the students to focus on would be, one, conduct a competition analysis. So how do we do compared to the competition? What are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats? How do our competitors, what's the features of their products we may not have? How do they charge? What kind of pricing strategy they use, where they operate, that kind of stuff. Then once you know that, try to identify the market characteristics, new market characteristics that are necessary for us to be successful. Is it maybe a certain level of income, or maybe it's certain cultural tradition, or maybe it's certain location? Then once those characteristics are identified, try to find markets that meet those criteria. Then once you find the markets that meet those criteria, what's the best market entry mode? Should it be simply, just exporting? Should we just sell those products, or should we form a joint venture with a local partner? Or should we maybe establish a wholly owned subsidiary? Or should we maybe go with franchising, those kinds of things? Then could you find us some perhaps local retailers, distributors, partners? And since we have students all around the planet, students really enjoy going to local companies and trying to see if they can get essentially a contract, a partnership contract. And some actually succeed at that, so very happy about that. And then obviously, what's the best pricing strategy for this country? Describe this country, its cultural environment, political environment, economic environment. What would be the best marketing strategy for this country? If it's a physical product that needs to be shipped, what's the best, logistics options, shipping options? Sometimes there would be questions about financing, about banking, about, money moving across the border, things like that. And then some companies would have sometimes more unique questions, like, for example, if we had to send an expatriate to that country to manage the operations, how much would it cost, to rent a house, to perhaps, hire bodyguards if it's a dangerous location, vehicle, stuff like that. And so in the end, students essentially, especially if you're talking about an international business course or maybe international management course, the challenge kind of closely mirrors what you talk about in the textbook. And then also the beauty is that we have students from all kinds of majors who just happen to take our course. So, and the tasks tend to be diverse enough so that the students who, for example, major in HR, they take on more, questions like, if you had to hire locals, what's the best recruitment strategy, selection strategy, compensation, management. If somebody majors in marketing, they can work more on the marketing question. If somebody majors in finance, they can deal more with the financial aspect. So this way, everybody can apply their own talents and knowledge in specifically that area that they know the best. And so that's basically it. So every week, the students complete weekly kind of survey or peer evaluations. And so the instructors receive at the end of the week a complete report on their student performance. So you get a full list of your students with detailed from week one when they do like a readiness test, and then weekly, their peer evaluations, their motivation level, questions they have, work they submitted this week. So this way you have a full, complete review of their performance and challenges they may be experiencing. We do a lot of things centrally, like, for example, all those weekly surveys, we handle them so the reminders go out automatically. You get an automatic update on how each student is doing. So you don't really have to do much here, so it saves you a lot of time. If you do, let's call it a domestic project where it's only your students, you would have to do all that performance monitoring, peer evaluations. Here we do it for you. And then, yeah, in the end, the students receive nice certificates that signify that they did complete a project in a global virtual team for a real company. And they also get recommendation letters that describe what this project was about, how the student did, if we can recommend the student for another similar task where it requires to work in a team and to work on a complex task. We hear a lot of good stories about students getting jobs because of those certificates and recommendation letters. They would tell us that I was in a job interview and there were 100 other candidates and I wasn't any different until I mentioned that I actually did complete a project with people from all around the world, and my real client was very happy about it. And maybe I even got some aftermarket commission if I was able to facilitate a contract. And then all of a sudden the employer like, wow, this is so good. Okay, you're hired. So we hear a lot of those stories. Plus, then finally, a couple of times a year, we bring the best students to a face-to-face meeting. We just had one big in Miami last week. So we had 150 best students from 43 countries, and so they met face-to-face. We had a number of companies there. We met with the CEOs and had the company tours, and then organized all kinds of workshops for them, how to write a resume, how to apply for jobs. Did this elevator pitch competition where we put a few executives, like literally CEOs, we put them in elevators, and like for half a day, they were riding up and down, and students were entering the elevator one by one and had like 2 minutes to sell their idea to them. So about a dozen of them actually got jobs out of that. So, and then finally, I guess, research. So research is a big component of XCulture, huge component, in fact. We collect over 2,000 variables, multi-level, multi-source, multi-method, longitudinal. So we measure just about everything that there is to measure about teams, from communication to conflicts to satisfaction to personality, cultural intelligence, you name it. So we try to collect as much data as possible, and have actually published quite a few studies already, have like 30 studies in development at this time. 5 people defended their dissertations using our data, and there are about a dozen other PhD students who are using their data now and will be defending in the next year or two. So as I said, research is a huge component. So if you're in the environment where you have to publish, we will have more data for you than you can process. So that's very briefly where we are. And I see Valerie also joined us. Hi, Valerie. Hope you can hear us. So that was a kind of brief overview of what we do. So now if you have any specific questions, I will be happy to take a closer look at those. Valerie, would you like to introduce yourself?
That was very
I apologize. I've had some problems with my computer this morning. I've actually had to download 2 different computers trying to get on here.
Oh.
So
well,
we're not in the business school right at the moment. We're building a new business school, and so we're all working from home for the last, whatever, 2 months. And so technology is a little not quite as advanced as what it is at the school.
Well, your persistence is much appreciated. So we have here Diane. Diane is in France.
Hi,
And
Diane.
I'm in North Carolina. And where are you, Valerie, again? So, because
I'm actually just outside of Boston.
So not too far. So East Coast. Okay, all right. Okay, so I hope you caught enough of the discussion or introduction that I provided as to what we do. Students from about 40 countries in a given semester, about 5,000 of them. MBA, about half. Undergraduates, about half. We try to keep them separate, even though they work on the same task. We try to keep them separate in all MBA and all undergraduate teams. Usually about 6-7 students per team, each one from a different country. So this way they work across the multiple time zones, cultural differences, institutional differences, have to communicate online. So things like that. And then we have usually try to keep it to about 5 companies a semester, but end up usually with a few more. And so those companies share their challenges. In most cases, they seek to expand into new markets and ask for questions like, what would be the best new market? Describe it, culture, politics in that country. What's the best marketing strategy there? If we wanted to find a retailer, distributor, what's the best way to go about it? What's the best pricing strategy? If we have to hire locals, how would you recruit them? How would you select them? How would you compensate them? So all kinds of questions related to those issues, logistics, finance, things like that. And so we just put the students in teams, share contacts, provide some training before the project starts. And then they work basically for about half of the semester when they actually, communicate every day. So we provide all the support, weekly surveys, peer evaluations. So this way, every instructor receives very detailed information on each student every week. So this way, if something goes wrong, you know about it right away. And then in the end, the students get nice certificates and recommendation letters that have been shown to help a lot, like hugely with finding jobs. And then research, as you probably heard already, so is a big component. So collect tons of data, writing lots of papers. So that's very briefly what we do. So if you have any questions, please go ahead. Maybe now is a good time.
Okay, the projects that they're actually working on, I know that they're from different companies.
Yes.
Will the project be from any one of the countries that the students are from?
We try to select, as I said, about 5, usually end up with about 7, 8 companies, so that each one represents a different industry and preferably is located, headquartered in a different country. And so then we'll leave it up to the students, up to the teams to select the one that they not even like the most, that they think they can help the most. And so then the students can choose any company, and usually they just, either know something about a particular industry or maybe interested in a particular industry, and that's why they select that particular client. And then what we do is we have the CEO and usually several top managers from the company to participate in a live webinar at the very beginning of the semester. In fact, right before the students have to choose the company. And so they would introduce the company, talk a little bit about the history and the products, and then maybe the challenge itself. And that allows the students to better understand what the company wants and then select the one where they feel they can help most. And then in most cases, we have 2 more webinars later on in the project. So that's where the students would also already have some information. So they've done some research. So in many cases, the students would then present some of their ideas, get feedback from the CEO, maybe adjust their line of thinking. Sometimes the CEO would provide some additional information. And so this way, kind of, a self-selection process. Sometimes professors want students to select a particular company, like, for example, that industry is, most interesting or relevant to the course, and that's fine too. So as I said, the only challenge here is that they work in global virtual teams, and it's usually a team's decision. It seems like most students are pretty indifferent as to what company they will be working for. So if there's someone on the team who has a very strong preference, the rest of the team just follows. But sometimes there would be a discussion, but yeah, they just select one that they like most, basically.
Okay.
Just to give you a few examples of other companies that participated, as I was saying earlier, so we've had some very big ones like Mercedes-Benz, like Louis Vuitton, like Home Depot, like JCB, it's the British excavator tractor, basically like British John Deere. So those are very big, huge companies with multi-billion-dollar revenues. But then we tried to go with medium-sized companies for the reason that, as I was saying earlier, they already have the capacity to grow and enter new markets. But unlike the huge companies like Mercedes-Benz, they don't have the expertise in the international kind of arena. And so for them, it's very difficult to, to scout every single country and see which one is the best market. Very difficult to send their employees there for a kind of exploration tour so that they can learn more about the culture and the, banking regulations and whatever else. And so this way, by working with us, they receive huge value because our students are basically coming from all around the world. We have all continents represented, and usually about 40 countries by the country of study, but about 80, 90 countries by the country of origin. So even if we have students, let's say, in the United States, they tend to come from all around the place. Same thing in Europe, same thing in some other countries. So, and those are the companies that, as I said, already have enough resources to grow, but at the same time need that help with the expansion strategy. And so that's where we get the most kind of thank yous, and where students in many cases would get job offers, where students in many cases would bring contracts and get aftermarket commission. What many companies say is that, okay, well, you identified the market. It sounds very promising. I do believe you. Why don't you prove that it works by, for example, finding a retailer or a chain of stores that would be willing to take on our products and, and sell them. So that would be the best proof. And every semester we have a few students who literally just go to some local stores and say, oh, we have this Italian shoemaker or a Lithuanian company that makes educational toys. Or an Indian company, Sakona, that makes big gaming stations like the ones you see in Chuck E. Cheese. And so would you want to buy that product, or would you want to retail that product? And in many cases, it actually works. And so like a mall would say, yeah, sure, it actually seems like those machines are really cool and the price is fine. So let's buy a few of them and put in our Chuck E. Cheese. Or we had a student, for example, whose uncle had a chain of shoe stores. And so we had a client from Italy that makes luxury shoes. And so, yeah, they just bought like a container of those and tried, and it seems to be working. So we even had a strange client once from Florida that makes cow pregnancy tests. And so not many teams chose him because it's such a unique product. But then there was one team with an Australian student. And so the guy literally just called some local farmers. And turns out whatever they use in Australia to test cows for pregnancy is much more expensive. So he sold kind of put that producer from Florida with the farmers in Australia, and so help them facilitate the contract. And apparently now they have a viable business in Australia. Who would have thought? So, yeah.
Excellent.
Okay. Questions first.
Yes.
First, you mentioned medium-sized companies. Yeah, the ones that you prefer normally. That makes sense to me. And then you also mentioned LVMH as one of the companies which participated in XCulture previously. Large, aren't they?
Yeah,
I think you mentioned the question was, I think they worldwide. They wanted to know where would be a good location to open the next store.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Can you share a little bit more on that? Because, wow.
Yeah, so what we do with
quite a challenge.
Yeah, with the large companies, usually what we do with them is we try to use them as hosts for the XCulture Symposium. As I was saying, used to be once a year, and now we will do it twice a year and possibly even 3 times starting next year. We would bring the best students from the last year for a face-to-face meeting. And so for those meetings, we usually would have what we call a host company, a company that, again, has a big challenge, and then the event would go, like, for example, the one we just had in Miami, it was hosted, the main sponsor or main host was Hard Rock International. Hard Rock International, it's a huge international company that basically operates all of those Hard Rock restaurants, and then a bunch of hotels and casinos, and now I'm thinking about adding a cruise line, basically like Walt Disney. And so the program included things like, and other partners were American Airlines, Miami International Airport, and the Port of Miami. And so the program was, it was all about Hard Rock International primarily. So there was a challenge. And so they wanted to basically know, the biggest challenge was, again, how do we expand more into new countries? but even more interestingly, how do you attract younger populations to our restaurants? Because apparently most of the people who go to Hard Rock are older than 40. So we had a tour of the company, met with the management. The company is owned by the Seminole tribe of South Florida. So that's the whole this Indian culture. So we met with those, learned about it, and then had the behind-the-scenes tour of the Port of Miami, the Miami International, and then had luncheon with the American Airlines executives and learned some more about their operations, especially the cargo division. Apparently, American Airlines is the largest, not only the #1 airline in the world by the size, but also has the largest what they call underbelly cargo operations. And then obviously had all those seminars. And so the same thing we did Louis Vuitton. It's been 3 years ago, I believe. It was in, so the headquarters are in Hollywood, Florida, actually very close to where we were this time. And so same thing. So it was a huge company as the main host.
They're a French company by origin, though.
Yes, they're a French company.
They're Paris.
Yes, I know, of course. But they have the office in Hollywood, Florida for North America. Okay. And from there, they also manage the South American locations. And so we didn't go to France for that. We met specifically here in the United States at the headquarters for the North American. I think it's actually both of the Americans that operated from there. So they have a few stores in Florida. So they took us to one of the stores and then things like that. So the winning team, by the way, received a special treatment. So they were like Louis Vuitton sent a limo to them, picked them up at the hotel in the limo, and then took them on a basically shopping spree to one of their stores as a kind of thank you for the best answers to the question. But yes, their challenge was we would like to expand into new countries, and literally on this planet, where should we open the next stores? Like give us the exact address, maybe even go and check if that building is available for for rent or lease or for sale. And they particularly were interested at that time in Latin American locations, but were open to other ones. And yes, as before, so we met with the managers here in the Florida location. Had first day, had a meeting, and they talked a little bit more about the company. Then the students had a few more days to finalize their proposals, and then they presented them to the management, received certificates and stuff like that. So for these events, when we meet face to face, we'll always try to go with the biggest and baddest company kind of available in the region. Like for example, our next meeting will be in October in Washington D.C. as part of the Academy of International Business Southeast Conference. And so this time the client probably will be HSBC, which is the world's second largest bank, one that specifically specializes, I think the logo is at home in the world. So basically the bank that specifically positions itself as knowing a lot about global cultures. So I'm not sure if they would have been the best for the general competition just because they already operate in pretty much every country. But because we would like our students to meet with the top executives and, have a little tour of the headquarters and stuff like that, that's why we choose them. So things like that.
Okay, so where would my students would be joining for the October 24th to November 24th, I believe it is, that session. So would they be going?
Well, no, I should. So those are kind of two different things in a sense. So that's a very good question. So the actual XCulture project and competition, it's all virtual. Nobody goes anywhere. They all stay home. It's about 5,000 people. And so we do it twice every semester. So the upcoming dates would be the so-called early track starts in late August, I believe August 23rd, if I remember correctly, and goes on for about 8 weeks and ends October 17 or something like that, or October 15. And then the late track starts October the 2nd, if I remember correctly, and goes on through basically all of October and November and ends November 27th, if I remember correctly. Again, about 8 weeks. The reason we have two tracks is because, as you can imagine, the semester starts at a different time in different countries. And so we have to have those two tracks to accommodate for those differences. And so all of this is virtual. It will be about 5,000 people total. They will work from home, and we will have, for most of the professors, if your semester starts kind of on the American schedule, in most cases, you go in the late track. You have a few weeks at the beginning of the semester to introduce your students to the project, maybe cover some basic topics related to your course, give them enough time to prepare. Then they participate in the project, and then once the project is done, you may still have like a week left or so if you want to do like post-project presentations, discussions, and things like that. For the semesters that start a little later, sometimes the project would then start in the beginning of the semester with a minimal introduction at the beginning, and then it's used more as a foundation for the rest of the course. And so if they have a few more weeks left at the end, that time will be used for kind of more substantial discussions and presentations and maybe reflection papers and stuff like that. So the whole thing takes up pretty much the whole semester, just depending on when in the semester it fits better. It may be a little bit more time to prepare or a little bit more time to discuss things after the project is over. And so that one is fully virtual. But
right.
In addition, as a whole separate event, we invite the best students to this face-to-face meeting. And so everybody can apply.
So is that the best team or is that individuals?
So it's usually the members of the best team get travel stipends, and we pay for their expenses, and they attend. In all cases, not everyone can attend. So out of 7 people, there would be sometimes 3 or 4, especially because we used to do it, still do it primarily in the United States, and sometimes not everyone can get a visa, not everyone can travel. So, but the rest are invited based on performance. Like, in fact, literally today, we will be sending out the invitations for the Washington, D.C. Event. And so we decided to invite only the students whose peer evaluations were above 4. And then so that gives us, from the last year, so there will be about 2,000 students who meet this criterion. We only have 50 spaces for the Washington, D.C. event. Out of about 2,000 students, I expect about 700 will apply. Others, timing is not right, don't have the money, whatever. So of those, about 700 probably will apply. And from those, we will then simply rank them on their performance and then invite the top 50 to attend. Of those top 50, probably there will be like 10 or 20 who will never apply because maybe change their mind, whatever, maybe 10, more like 10. And then there will be another maybe 4 or 5 who will not get the visa. And so we'll then go down the waiting list and then just invite the next 5, 10 and until we have the 50. The one in Miami, we had 150 spots because we organized it independently and could have a larger crowd. The one in Washington, D.C., it's part of the Academy of International Business Conference, and they limit the number of spots. We don't want to turn the conference into a student event. So we usually limit it to about 50 best students. So it's kind of inviting a little bit more than just the very best, but from those who apply, then select the best and invite them that way.
Okay. And in terms of material to cover, you mentioned you may want to cover some of the topics. So I can think of a lot of different topics that I could cover, having worked in international business for many years. Is there anything what are the projects typically to take a product into another country or to expand existing business in the country, or what am I trying to cover?
We used to do or design the challenges so that they more or less mirror the typical international business textbook, so that there is something on the cultural environment, political environment, economic environment, entry modes, marketing, HR, finance, those kinds of things. And it still stays to a large extent that same format. But we try to work with companies before we design the challenge instructions, trying to figure out what exactly they need help with. And sometimes some of the questions may be a little bit unique to their business. But in most cases, pretty much almost every time, with a few exceptions, sometimes a company wants a little bit more focus on like product development in addition to whatever we do. But in most cases, the challenge goes like this and literally has these 7, 8 questions. So they would say, start with the competition analysis. So basically analyze how we are different from the competition, strengths, weaknesses, all those kinds of things, price and strategy and things. Then try to select or find markets or identify markets that would be most promising for our product. So would it be a market that maybe has, as I said, certain income level, or maybe certain location, or maybe certain cultural traditions? So identify what's important for our product to succeed, and then identify what markets have those components. So where we potentially could have, viable, good sales essentially. Then once you've identified one or several of those countries, describe them, analyze them, political environment, economic environment, anything we need to know about those countries to be successful there. Then once you know about the country, try to develop all the other components of the entry strategy. Entry mode, so should we just go and establish a wholly owned subsidiary? Should we try to have a some sort of a partnership, joint venture? Maybe should we have a franchising strategy or something else, or exporting? What's the best price for that market? What's the best pricing strategy? Would it be a fixed price, or would it be some sort of a subscription, or maybe some sort of financing or something like that? If we have to hire locals, best ways to hire them, best ways to manage them, to compensate them. If we have to send expatriates, what would it take? Schools for the family, banking regulations, visa regulations, whatever else they need to know. If it's a physical product, then the best shipping options. Are there any certification requirements? Are there any custom duties that we need to pay? Things like that. And then sometimes companies would add a question or two that is unique to them, like literally, like how would you adjust our design of our product to make it more appealing to the local customers? Or is the brand name okay? Should we change the name of the brand to make it more appealing to the local customers? Should we change the packaging colors and things like that? And so students, as I said, in most cases, there would be only one student in that country from the team, or sometimes it would be even a country that nobody's from the team is on. But in many cases, it would be one of the countries where, there is at least one of the team members there. And so they would do some research and they would talk about it. They would do some research. In many cases, the clients would actually ask to collect some data. Like, for example, last semester, we had a company that does plagiarism check. And so they literally asked, why don't you go and talk to the deans of your business schools and ask them, what plagiarism software they use now? What would it take them to switch to a different one? What price would they find reasonable? So students would literally talk to 3-4 people. Which is a very small sample size, but when you have 1,000 people doing that, all of a sudden you get a very big, international sample, and so it gives you a lot of information. And for the students, it's a good practice in research. And in many cases, students like the survey part, because that gives them a good excuse to approach top people at their whatever, dream companies and talk to them. And we have so many students who literally just call the CEO and say, I work for this, project and do some research for a company. And so I want to talk to you because, that's what I do for school. And they would get interviews literally with CEOs of big local companies or stores or whatever else. And so they're like, wow, that's so good. And so for some of them, they try to use that then later to get jobs and things. So that's roughly how the challenge is structured.
Yeah. Okay. What's the deliverable, Vas? You mentioned that the students would have 2 webinars to predict. Yeah. Is there a document that they need to deliver? Or?
Yes. So the ultimate deliverable is the report. And so that's where they basically write up their proposed strategy, and we'll limit that to about 15 to 35 pages. Students attempted to write more, but the busy CEOs don't have the time to read big reports. So when a company gets, let's say, 200-300 reports, we have about 1,000 teams, but it's about 200 teams per company. So we're talking about this much paper. And so we try to teach students, how to write them more concisely, nice executive summary and stuff like that. But that's the ultimate document. And so that's what you will get also. So from each team that your student was a member of, you'll get all the reports, obviously. In fact, you will get all 1,000 of them, but you will be able to select the ones where your students were members of. But then also every week we ask them to deliver or submit a little deliverable, basically what they're working on now. So we used to separate it by the question, like this week, develop a draft of your HR section, and next week a draft of your marketing section. Now, last semester we tried, and it actually worked a little bit better. Each week basically submit what you have so far. So maybe week 1 it would be just a couple of ideas, like a 1 paragraph. Maybe week 2 it's a little bit more developed, a little bit more substance. Week 3 even more, and then week 8 it's almost a final report, just needs a little polishing, and then finally they submit the final report. So there are 1 big report at the end, and then intermediate kind of deliverables that we try to read, but not so careful. It's more kind of to prompt students not to wait until the last day and do something every week, so that they don't have to, panic in the end and try to catch up, do everything in the last 2-3 days.
Okay, so in terms of who's doing the grading?
That's a very good question. So from you, the instructors, we demand only one thing. When the final reports are submitted, we want you to evaluate the reports from the teams that your students were members of, and we have a standard, basically very simple rubrics. So, formatting, language quality, but then also economic viability, quality of the executive summary, and then a grade for each of the report section. So something that you would be doing no matter what if you did a domestic project. And so what we do then in the end, so once the project is submitted, we give a little time for each professor to do the evaluation of the reports that their students were members of. And then in about 10 days or 2 weeks, we have those results. We pull them in one big file and then share it with everyone. So this way you can see what other professors gave for the same reports. And for us, for the research purposes, we get a nice, reliable estimate of the quality of the reports. If each team has 6-7 students, that's 6-7 separate professors. That's 6-7 separate sets of evaluations of those reports, which gives us a nice, variable data for the research purposes. The weekly submissions, we cannot expect the professors to evaluate them. So we have, last semester had about 40, probably we'll have about 60, 70 this semester. It worked well. I call them coaches. What that is, many students, after participating in XCulture, like a huge number, in fact, hundreds of them every semester, ask if they can continue working with the project and continue getting some experience because they liked it, they feel that it helps them in the future career and stuff like that. And so what we do is we allow the best students from the last semester to become coaches for the new generation of students. And they receive training, additional training before the project starts. We train them, they get like 16 training modules, how to give feedback effectively, cross-cultural communication, cross-cultural conflict resolution, online collaboration tools, things like that. And so the best students, like the very best from the last semester, become coaches to the new generation and thereby gain additional experience. But the beauty of that is that they also work with the new generation of the students and, among other things, also look at their weekly submissions and provide some feedback. And so here you will see that, you will see the evaluations, you will see the numbers. If you want to use them, we sort of do the evaluation for you. Some professors apparently don't care about those weekly evaluations. They just wait until they get the final report and then do the evaluation themselves, and that's perfectly fine. Some look at those evaluations, and especially if there is something that signals a problem, then they reach out to the team and say, okay, I see that you didn't do well last week. Anything that you need help with. And those coaches also help students. Like as I said, sometimes students would actually want feedback, so they would submit the draft of the document. They would say, okay, this is what we have so far. Would you take a look and provide some feedback? And so the coaches are specifically trained both in general international business beyond what they learned in their own class. So they know a little bit more on how to do it right. But then also they know how to provide feedback effectively. So they would provide some feedback. So this way students get a little bit extra guidance from the more experienced coaches. And as I said, and then we do get some evaluations this week, this way every week. So as I said, don't really pay too much attention to them. But if we see something really low, that's where we also try to go to that team and say, okay, it seems like your team is a little, behind. Let us see how we can help you.
Okay. Sounds terrific.
Okay. So yeah, sounds good that the students have the coaches from the alumni of XCulture. So who would they refer to, the students, for coaching? Does everyone have access to a coach, every team?
Not anymore. So we used, with the coaching, we started, it's been about 2 years since we've been experimenting with this program. And so the first time we did it, we would assign several teams to each coach. So this way, each team had a personal coach. And frankly, that didn't work very well. The reason for that is that some teams didn't want a coach, so they felt the coach is more like a boss, and they didn't want that. Some just never had, interest in using the coach help, and so some coaches had much more work than others. What we do now, and that works much better, there is this email address, coaching@xculture.org, and so either individuals or teams can apply basically for coaching sessions. So if there is a question they have, or if they have a draft that they would like a coach to take a look at, or if there is a conflict, or if an individual team member maybe has problems with other team members, they just send an email to coaching@xculture.org, and we have a coach coordinator who looks at them every few hours. And so every time there is a new request, he just looks at the available coaches, who's available, whose areas of expertise those are, and just assigns the cases, basically kind of walk-in type of approach. And in most cases, once a team approaches a coach and starts working with one, they continue working with that same one throughout the semester. But as I said, it works basically like a walk-in clinic. So we have had about 40 of them last semester. So the students could either specifically ask for one, but in most cases they don't know the coaches, so just a name, so they would just send a generic inquiry to that email, and then a coach is assigned to the case. And so this way it allows us to keep the coaches roughly equally busy, make sure that everybody gets a little, of conflict resolution, a little feedback provision, a little bit of help with maybe, copy editing and whatever else, they might work on. And so that way it works very well. A huge number of students would like to be coaches. For us, the bigger problem is that first, we don't need too many of them because coordination takes time. Second, as I said, we're still experimenting with this program, but it worked very, very well in the last year and a half, 2 years. We even had 6 coaches paid for their trip, like Miami meeting last week. So we had 6 coaches who specifically arrived in Miami and spent the whole 6 days with the students, literally, like helping them rehearse the presentations and work on the challenge, as well as helping us a little bit with all those field trips, like making sure everybody got on the bus and stuff like that. The coaches are primarily former MBA students, so they're a little bit more experienced and a little bit more mature, so that helps a lot too. So works very well. Yeah. In fact, it almost seems like coaches get even more value from this than the students themselves, because students at the end of the project, they can brag that they have international experience nobody else has. But the coaches can say that not only do they have the international experience, they basically managed a bunch of international global teams. And so that is something that probably not even many managers have. So that's a real job getter. So for them, it works very well. And for us, we kind of get free help in a sense.
Excellent.
Sounds great. So what role of the professor then, once the projects are formed and it's ongoing?
Well, from the professor, this is an excellent question. Ideally, we would like the professors to be as engaged as possible. At the minimum, we would like the professors to devote 10-15 minutes maybe at the beginning of each lecture, just to ask, how you're doing, any problems, any questions, any challenges. In my own class, I tend to have large classes, like 150 students and sometimes even more. When we do that 15-minute, there would be always one student who says, oh, I have my team on Skype, like turns the laptop, everybody say hi, and the whole class says hi. So, and then obviously, stay in touch. And then there would be some questions, especially in the beginning, the students will be asking, how do you do this or that? Obviously, you as an instructor would be the first person, they contact. But at the same time, lately, we started doing more and more central work. So in the first year, second year, we would rely a lot on the instructors. And that created 2 problems. One, too much work for the instructors, or not too much, but still some work. And 2, frankly, not all instructors are equally prepared. Some instructors may be excellent and have taught IB for a long time and know how to deal with those issues. And some maybe, just started teaching, or maybe come from a country where, maybe academic standards are a little lower and stuff like that. And so, and some may literally just get sick, for example, for a while, or be busy with other things. So therefore, we try to do as much centrally as possible. So obviously, once we get the names of the students, we send a personal welcome letter to each student. Then we send all the pre-project materials to the students so that they can review them and kind of familiarize themselves, on the one hand with the project itself, on the other hand with online collaboration tools like Dropbox and Google Docs and all that stuff, and kind of learn a little bit of that stuff. And then obviously weekly evaluations. So we centrally send out links to the weekly survey, and then receive the data, consolidate the data, and send to the instructors all of the processed, nice, neat summaries. So same thing with the evaluations. Sometimes some instructors, unfortunately, do not deliver the evaluations on time. So we use the coaches to evaluate those reports additionally. So we still end up with a good number of evaluations. So as I said, we do pretty much everything that needs to be done centrally. And if an instructor, God forbid, got hit by a truck, the students would still be able to finish the project, no problem, because they'll receive enough support centrally. But obviously, ideally, we would like the instructors to be as involved as possible. And as I said, frequently ask students what's going on, help if there is a problem, things like that. So you definitely need to, or should be, providing help as you would in a normal project if you had like a team-based project in your own class without any international components. So, but
okay. Yeah. So would it be necessary face-to-face contact?
Well, as I said, the main, XCulture project, so there is no face-to-face contact among the students. I mean, obviously they can have Skype conversations, but there is no travel requirement. There is no, one-on-one contact, personal contact required. It's all virtual, which kind of makes it, as I said, that's
Sorry, I phrased that badly. would I have to have face-to-face time with the students?
Not necessarily. Many professors actually teach online. In fact, my last two semesters, I taught my courses online, so I don't even meet my students face-to-face unless they stop by my office to say hi. Most are face-to-face, and obviously if you have one of those, you'll see them every week in the lecture. But either way is fine. So, to us, it doesn't matter. And in fact, there seems to be no difference in student performance if they're taking it online or face-to-face. So, yeah. The only other two requirements we have is, if possible, in some rare cases, it's impossible because of the local school policies. But in other cases, if possible, we want the XCulture project to be no less than 20% of the total course grade, just to provide the necessary motivation. And then the peer evaluations to be no less than 20% of the XCulture grade. So again, to make sure that students kind of have the necessary motivation to work hard and please their team. In a few rare cases, we would have a class, like for example, we have one university from Spain where the professor is not allowed to use team-based grades for individual grades. So they're not allowed to use peer evaluations as part of the course grade. And so in those cases, they just put more emphasis on the quality of the report. On the weekly deliverables. Which are done kind of a little bit more individually. So, but other than that, it's, as I said, we leave it up to the professors to decide how they want to grade. Some, say, okay, 20% peer evaluations, 80% quality of the report. Others do it the other way around. Some would give, like 30-30 and the other 30 to the weekly progress surveys because they feel students have to be more motivated to do something every week. So whichever way it works for you, we are fine with that as long as students have some adequate measures of quality, and the grade depends on how well they do in the project.
You talked about how the CEOs come on and talk about their projects and that sort of thing. Are those videotaped or
live? Just like what we have now.
Projects.
Yeah, just like what we have now. So we use a webinar, and so everybody can either passively watch on YouTube or participate just like we are here and ask questions. Most students prefer to just watch and then email questions, and we just ask those questions as they come in. But there would be always a dozen or so who very actively engage and start asking and debating and discussing. And that's fine too. So, and then obviously we record the session, and so those who couldn't attend live because of the time zone, inconveniences and stuff, they can just watch a recording later on.
Okay.
So I guess I should say, it may sound a little complicated given the size and the complexities of the project, but in reality, it's not really that it's fairly simple. Mm-hmm. Essentially, just students in international teams, and we just do our best to provide the support. And I should warn you that like in weeks 1 and 2, everybody's happy, euphoria. Oh, I'm working with people from all around the world, so cool, Then week 3, 4, 5, that's when you have this kind of disillusionment stage, like, oh, it's much more difficult. It takes so much time. One of my team members not responding. Somebody got sick. Somebody has some sort of national religious holiday, and so they're not available for like whole week. So then you start hearing some complaints from the students about those things. But then inevitably, at the end of the project, everybody is happy. And then we get, first of all, the satisfaction is always like about 90% of the students are above 4. About on a 5-point scale, so they said it was good or excellent. About 80% actually stay with excellent. There would be always like 3-4% who will say, no, I didn't like it. It didn't work for me. But I guess that percentage is probably as low or maybe even lower as in any other project. I mean, it's always, somebody's always not happy. But it's a very, as I said, it's like 3-4% who are like below 3, so below, okay. So, but the vast majority are, it's a heavily skewed distribution towards the positive end, with the vast majority being there. And then you would get a lot of comments in the post-project survey where they say, yeah, it was hard, it was, difficult. Sometimes I was regretting that I got into this. But looking back, actually, it was the best experience of my education so far. I met people around the world. I gained some new experience. I met some, business professionals. And many, actually, as I said, you get job offers from companies. So we have every time have at least several students who get job offers or internship offers. So for them, obviously, that's a huge success. And so in the end, we always get extremely positive feedback, like almost to the point that it's almost too good to be true. But, you'll see that. So.
Okay.
Terrific.
That sounds great.
Yes, so if you decided to participate, your next step would be to simply submit your course information, and you have the link. If you go to xculture.org, just click on that link, apply. And so that will give us information when your semester starts, when it ends, how many students you have. So it allows us to better, assess where you fit best. And yeah, and we'll take it from there. So after that, once approved, you will be asked to submit the student names. And once we get the student names, we send welcome letters to the students with the links to all the materials. And from there, it just goes week by week. So nothing unusual. Just so. As I said, it will be challenging at times, but no more and probably much less than if you had to do it on your own with your own class. So it will be probably less work because we do a lot of work for you, but it's going to be definitely much more fun for the students than just working with people from their own class. So, yeah.
Good.
All right. So I'm gonna stop here. It seems like we have 3 people watching us on YouTube at this time live. I'm not sure why they decided not to log in and introduce themselves. But in any case, hello to all of you watching on YouTube, and those who missed it in live. The recording will be available. And yeah, I hope to be able to welcome you to XCulture very soon.
Excellent.
Right, yeah.
We look forward to it.
Great.
Thank you so much for your time. And
Thanks.
Looking forward to our collaboration. As I said, XCulture is not only teaching, but also research. So if you happen to be at an institution where you must do research, we have more data for you than you can process. So that's a huge deal. So hope to work with you on that front as well.
Good.
Bye-bye.